Some of us know what it means to be forgotten. Not in the dramatic way stories tell it, no sudden abandonment, no slammed doors, just the slow fade, the phone calls that grow shorter, the visits that become maybe next month. The realization, one ordinary Tuesday morning, that no one is coming. This is a story about two souls who found each other on a dirt road in Georgia. One was a woman who had stopped expecting anything from the world. The other was a dog who had stopped expecting anything but pain. What happened between them wasn't magic. It was simpler than that and harder. It was the choice to stop walking past someone else's suffering. The choice to kneel down in the dirt, bad knees and all, and say, "I see you. You're not invisible to me." Sometimes that's all any of us really need. The smell hit her first. Sarah Miller had lived 68 years on this earth. She'd cleaned up after sick children, changed her husband's wound dressings, sat beside her mother as cancer took its final hold. She knew the smell of a body giving up. This was that smell. She eased her foot off the gas, and the old Ford pickup groaned as it slowed on the rutted dirt road. Late September sun cut through the oak trees lining Cutter's Lane, throwing long shadows across the gravel. This shortcut had saved her 10 minutes every grocery run for 40 years. Today, it would change everything. At first she thought it was a feed sack someone had dumped. Dark shape, motionless, half hidden in the drainage ditch where rainwater pooled after storms. People threw all kinds of things out here where they thought no one would see. Old tires, broken furniture, things they didn't want to deal with anymore. Then the shape moved. Not much, just a twitch, a slight lift of something that might have been a head. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her groceries sat on the passenger seat: milk, bread, the Folgers coffee she'd been buying for 40 years even though Harold wasn't around to drink his share anymore. The milk would spoil if she didn't get it home soon. She should keep driving. Call animal control when she got back. Let someone else handle it. The shape moved again. This time she saw it clearly, a paw, scraping weakly at the dirt, the motion of something trying to stand and failing. Sarah pulled the truck to the shoulder and cut the engine. The silence that followed was the kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat. Cicadas droning in the tall grass, a mockingbird somewhere in the oaks, and underneath it all, a sound so faint she almost missed it, a thin, rasping wheeze, the sound of lungs fighting for every breath. She climbed out of the truck. Her left knee popped, the way it always did now. 68 years old, and her body reminded her of that fact every single day. The smell grew stronger as she approached. Infection. Waste. Something rotting that shouldn't be rotting yet. 10 feet away. She stopped. It was a dog. German Shepherd, or what was left of one. Male, she thought. Though it was hard to tell under the matted fur and the dirt and the Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A chain. A rusted metal chain wrapped around the dog's neck so tight that the links had disappeared into the flesh. Skin had grown over parts of it, sealing the metal inside the body like a terrible secret. Whoever had put that chain on this animal had done it years ago, and it had never come off. The dog's eyes opened. Sarah had taught elementary school for 35 years. She'd looked into thousands of young faces and learned to read what words couldn't say. Fear, hope, confusion, joy. This dog's eyes held none of those things. They were flat, dull. The color of river water after a storm, brown murk that reflected nothing back. These were the eyes of a creature that had stopped expecting anything from the world except pain. And yet, when the dog saw her standing there, something shifted. Not hope it was too broken for hope, but something older, deeper, the same instinct that makes a drowning man reach for a hand even when he's given up on being saved. The dog tried to stand. Its legs shook violently, splaying out on the muddy ground. The belly, Sarah noticed it now, was swollen grotesquely, stretched tight as a drum, while the rest of the body showed every rib, every knob of spine. Something was terribly wrong inside. The dog collapsed back into the mud. A sound escaped its throat, not a bark, not a growl, something between a moan and a sob, a sound Sarah had never heard an animal make before. Then it looked at her again, and waited for the kick. The shout, the stone thrown to drive it away. Whatever always came next from the two-legged creatures who had taught it what to expect from the world. Sarah's chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with her heart condition. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror, those first months after Harold died, when the phone stopped ringing, when her children's visits became phone calls, and phone calls became texts, and texts became silence. When she realized that to the world outside this farmhouse, she had become invisible, something not worth stopping for. The dog's eyes never left her face, still waiting, still braced for pain. Sarah lowered herself to one knee. The joint screamed in protest. She didn't care. "Easy now," she said softly. Her voice cracked on the words she hadn't spoken aloud to anyone in 3 days. "Easy, old fella. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you no more." The dog flinched at the sound, but it didn't look away. And in that moment, kneeling in the dirt beside a dying animal that the whole world had thrown away, Sarah Miller made a choice. She had no idea what it would cost her, no idea what it would give her back. She only knew she couldn't walk away. There's something about finding a creature in need that reminds us who we really are. If this story touched you, I'd love to know where you're reading from today. Drop a comment below and let's see how far kindness can travel. Sarah pushed herself back to standing. Her knee buckled, caught, held. The dog watched her, those flat, muddy eyes tracking every movement. "All right," she breathed. "All right. Let's figure this out." The truck was 15 feet away. The dog weighed 70 pounds, maybe more with that swollen belly. Sarah hadn't lifted anything heavier than a bag of groceries in 2 years. She walked back to the Ford and opened the rear door. The old wool blanket she kept behind the seat, Harold had bought it at a Goodwill in 1992, said every truck needed a blanket for emergencies. She spread it across the floor of the cab. Back to the dog. Slower this time. Hands visible, palms up. "I'm gonna touch you now, old fella, just to pick you up. That's all." She crouched down. The smell was worse here, close to the source. Her eyes watered. Her fingers slid under the dog's chest. She felt the ridge of each rib through matted fur. The animal tensed every muscle, locking tight, but it didn't snap at her. Didn't even lift its head. It had stopped fighting a long time ago. Sarah braced her feet, bent her knees the way Harold always told her. She gripped the blanket's edge and pulled, using the fabric as a sling to slide the dog toward her rather than lifting dead weight. The dog's body shifted 6 inches. 12. Sarah's shoulders burned. Sweat ran into her eyes, blurring the world to smears of green and brown. 3 steps to the truck, she dragged the blanket across the dirt, the dog's weight pulling against her with every inch. Her lower back seized a hot wire of pain shooting from spine to hip. She made it to the tailgate, slid the dog onto Harold's old blanket, collapsed against the side of the truck, chest heaving. The dog lay where she'd put it, eyes still open, still watching her. Then it did something she didn't expect. It turned its head slow, trembling, and licked the back of her hand. Just once. A dry tongue, cracked and rough. Sarah's throat closed up. She slammed the door shut, climbed into the driver's seat, cranked the engine. The milk on the passenger seat had been sitting in the heat for 10 minutes now. It would spoil. She didn't turn toward home. She turned right, toward the only veterinarian in Millbrook. And as the truck bounced down the dirt road, she glanced in the rearview mirror at the shape lying motionless on the blanket. The dog's belly rose and fell, shallow, irregular. How long did it have? The bell above the door jangled as Sarah pushed into Whitfield Veterinary Clinic. The air conditioning hit her face like a wall cold, sharp, smelling of antiseptic and the faint musk of frightened animals. "Be right with you," a voice called from the back. Sarah stood in the empty waiting room, breathing hard. Her blouse was soaked through with sweat, clinging to her back. Her arms still trembled from dragging the dog. "Tom," she called out. "Tom, I need help." Footsteps. Dr. Tom Whitfield emerged from the examination room, wiping his hands on a paper towel. 55 years old. Gray beard trimmed close, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He'd been the only vet in Millbrook for 25 years. He'd put down Harold's old beagle 3 months after the funeral, held Sarah's hand while she cried. He took one look at her face and the paper towel dropped to the floor. "Where?" "Truck. Back seat." They moved fast. Tom grabbed a stretcher from the supply closet, the kind with wheels and canvas straps, and they were outside in seconds. The heat slamming back into Sarah's lungs after the cold of the clinic, Tom opened the rear door of the pickup. Stopped. "Lord have mercy." Sarah watched his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his nostrils flared at the smell. "Help me get him inside," Tom said. His voice had gone flat, professional. They lifted the dog onto the stretcher together. The animal didn't resist, didn't make a sound. Its eyes were half closed now, the shallow breathing even more ragged than before. Inside, under the fluorescent lights of the examination room, the damage was worse than Sarah had realized. Tom pulled on latex gloves with a snap. His fingers moved through the matted fur, probing, assessing. He tilted the dog's head to examine the chain embedded in its neck, and his mouth pressed into a thin line. "This has been here for years," he said quietly. "Look, the skin has grown over these links here, and here, the infection goes deep." He moved to the swollen belly, pressed gently. The dog whimpered the first real sound it had made since the ditch. "Heartworm, advanced stage. There's fluid buildup in the abdomen." Tom straightened up, pulled off his gloves. "Sarah, this dog, whoever had it before didn't just neglect it. This is years of damage. Can you fix him?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He walked to the counter, picked up a handheld scanner, ran it over the dog's shoulder blade. "A beep?" "Microchip," he said. He checked the screen, and something changed in his expression, a hardening around the eyes. "What?" "This dog is registered to Earl Dawkins." The name landed like a stone in still water. Sarah knew Earl Dawkins. Everyone in Millbrook knew Earl Dawkins. He owned a cattle ranch out past Jackson County, kept dogs chained in his yard as guard animals. Animal Control had investigated him last year. She remembered reading about it in the Millbrook Gazette. They'd seized 3 dogs, but the case had gone nowhere. "Earl dumped him," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "That would be my guess." Tom set down the scanner. "Dog got too old, too sick. Wasn't useful anymore, so he drove it out to some back road and left it to die." Sarah looked at the dog on the examination table. Its eyes were open again, watching her, that same flat, empty gaze, but there was something else in it now, something she hadn't seen before. The faintest flicker of attention, as if it was listening, as if it understood that its fate was being decided in this cold room with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "What would it cost," Sarah heard herself ask, "to fix all of this?" Tom rubbed the back of his neck. "Surgery to remove the chain, treat the infection. Heartworm treatment, that's a series of injections over months. Medication, follow-up care, rehabilitation. He paused. $1,800 to $2,200. Maybe more if there are complications. $1,800. That was nearly 2 months of her Social Security check. That was the emergency fund she'd been building since Harold died. That was, and if I don't, the words came out rough, if I just let you put him down. Tom's eyes met hers. No judgment in them, just understanding. Then he goes to sleep and doesn't wake up. Painless. Quick. Nobody would blame you. Sarah, you've already done more than most people would. The dog's breathing filled the silence. In, out. In, out. Each breath a small war. Sarah thought about her empty house. The phone that never rang. The children who had stopped visiting. She thought about Harold's face in that hospital bed. The way he'd looked at her in those final days, not asking for anything. Just grateful she was there. She thought about what it meant to be thrown away when you weren't useful anymore. Do it, she said. The surgery. All of it. Tom nodded slowly. You sure? I'm sure. All right. He reached for a fresh pair of gloves. I should tell you, even if everything goes perfectly. A dog this traumatized may never be normal. He may never trust people again. Sarah reached out and let her fingers rest on the dog's head. It flinched, but it didn't pull away. What's his name? She asked. According to the chip, no name registered. Just a number. Sarah looked at the scar tissue around the dog's neck, the chain that had become part of its body. Max, she said quietly. His name is Max. Tom wrote something on his clipboard. Then he looked up. Sarah, you know Earl Dawkins isn't going to like this. That chip means legally. This is still his property. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Max's eyes stayed fixed on Sarah's face. What happens when Earl finds out? Sarah drove home alone. Max stayed at the clinic. Tom wanted to stabilize him before surgery, get fluids into his dehydrated body, run blood tests to see what else might be hiding beneath that matted fur. The milk had spoiled. She could smell it when she opened the passenger door, that sour, curdled stench, mixing with the lingering odor of infection that still clung to her clothes. She threw the whole gallon in the trash without opening it. The farmhouse was quiet. It was always quiet now. Sarah stood in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter, and let the silence press against her. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room with Harold's recliner still sitting in the corner where he'd left it. The leather cracked and faded from 30 years of use. She hadn't been able to move it, couldn't bring herself to sit in it either. The phone on the wall was the same rotary model they'd installed in 1986. It hadn't rung in 6 days. She picked up the receiver anyway. Dialed Jennifer's number in California. It rang 4 times, then clicked to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Jennifer and Mark. We can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, hung up. She tried David next. 3 rings. Hello. Her son's voice, distant, distracted. She could hear typing in the background. David, it's Mom. Oh, hey Mom. Listen, I'm in the middle of something at work. Can I call you back? I just wanted to tell you. Actually, Karen's calling on the other line. I really gotta go. Talk soon, okay? The line went dead. Sarah set the phone back in its cradle. Her hand was shaking. She told herself it was because she hadn't eaten since breakfast. 3 days later, she brought Max home. Tom had performed the surgery to remove the chain. It had taken 2 hours. The metal had been embedded so deeply that cutting it free meant cutting through scar tissue. Infected muscle, layers of damage that had accumulated over years. The wound was bandaged now, a white collar of gauze wrapped around Max's neck. "Keep it clean and dry," Tom had said, handing her a bag of medications. "Antibiotics twice a day, pain pills as needed, and Sarah—" He'd paused, his hand on her arm. "Go slow with him. He's been through more than either of us can imagine." Now Max lay in the corner of her kitchen, on a dog bed she'd bought at the Goodwill for $4.50. He hadn't moved since she'd set him there. His eyes were open, tracking her every movement, but his body stayed frozen against the wall. Sarah pulled a chair to the middle of the kitchen, sat down, kept her hands in her lap where he could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. "I know you don't believe that yet. That's okay." Max's ears flattened against his skull. She didn't move closer, didn't reach for him, just sat there, letting him watch her, letting him learn the shape of her stillness. An hour passed. Her back ached. Her knee throbbed. She didn't get up. Outside, the September sun dipped toward the tree line, throwing long shadows through the kitchen window. The old Motorola radio on the counter played softly WMLB, the local AM station, a man's voice droning about high school football scores and the price of soybeans. Max's breathing changed. Sarah noticed a slight loosening of the tension in his chest. His eyes were still fixed on her, but the rigid alertness had softened into something closer to exhaustion. He was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that came from years of never being able to rest. "You can sleep," Sarah murmured. "I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't know if dogs understood words, but she thought maybe they understood tone. The rhythm of a voice that wasn't shouting. The patience of a presence that wasn't demanding anything. Max's eyes drifted closed, opened again, closed. His head lowered slowly to his paws. Sarah sat perfectly still, barely breathing, watching the dog slip into sleep. His legs twitched once some dream reflex and a small whine escaped his throat. But he didn't wake. The kitchen clock ticked, the radio murmured, and Sarah Miller sat alone in the gathering dark, keeping watch over a broken creature that the whole world had thrown away. The bill from Tom's clinic arrived 3 days later, $1,847.32. Sarah wrote a check from the savings account she'd been building since Harold's death, the emergency fund. The just-in-case money, the cushion that was supposed to protect her from catastrophe. She didn't hesitate, but as she sealed the envelope and stuck a stamp on the corner, she thought about what Tom had said, about the microchip, about Earl Dawkins and his ranch full of chained dogs and his reputation for holding grudges. Millbrook was a small town. Everybody knew everybody's business. It was only a matter of time before someone mentioned to someone else that old Mrs. Miller had picked up a stray German shepherd out on Cutter's Lane. And sooner or later, that news would reach Earl. Sarah looked across the kitchen at Max, still curled on his bed, still watching her with those wary, wounded eyes. What would she do when Earl came for him? The first week was silence. Max stayed in the corner of the kitchen. He ate only when Sarah left the room. She'd set down his bowl, walk to the living room, and listen to the soft clicks of his teeth against the metal rim. When she returned, the bowl would be empty and he'd be pressed against the wall again. Watching her with those flat, unreadable eyes, she learned to move slowly, no sudden gestures, no loud noises. The radio stayed on low, a constant murmur of voices to fill the emptiness between them. At night, she heard him whimpering. 2 in the morning. 3 in the morning, she'd wake to the sound of his legs scrabbling against the floor, claws scratching at the linoleum as his body fought invisible enemies in his sleep. The first time it happened, she'd gotten out of bed and walked to the kitchen doorway. Max was on his side, eyes squeezed shut, legs pumping frantically, his lips pulled back from his teeth in a silent snarl, whatever he was dreaming about. It was chasing him. Sarah lowered herself to the floor. The cold tiles bit through her nightgown. She sat with her back against the doorframe, 6 feet away from him, and began to hum. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice cracked. She hadn't sung in years, not since Harold's funeral, when the congregation had stumbled through the hymn and she'd mouthed the words without making any sound at all. That saved a wretch like me. Max's legs slowed. The whimpering faded to a low moan, then stopped entirely. His body relaxed against the floor. Sarah sat there until the sky outside turned gray with pre-dawn light. Her back ached. Her hip had gone numb. But Max slept peacefully for the first time since she'd brought him home. The second week brought small changes. Tuesday morning, Sarah set down his food bowl and walked to her usual chair at the kitchen table instead of leaving the room. She picked up the newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette. 3 days old, and pretended to read. Max watched her. His body was rigid, ears flat. Every muscle tensed for flight. She didn't look at him. Kept her eyes on the paper. Turning pages she wasn't reading, letting the rustle of newsprint fill the silence. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then she heard it, the soft clink of his teeth against the bowl. Still eating. With her in the room. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she turned another page. She didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge what had just happened. But something loosened in her chest. A knot she hadn't known she'd been carrying. By Friday. He was eating while she sat at the table every morning. By Sunday, he'd stopped pressing himself against the wall when she entered the room. He still watched her, always watching, but the rigid terror had softened into something more like wariness. She started talking to him, not expecting answers, just letting her voice fill the space between them. "Weather's turning," she'd say, looking out the window at the October clouds gathering over the oak trees. "Gonna rain tonight. I think Harold always said he could smell rain coming. Said it smelled like pennies and cut grass." Max's ears would twitch at the sound of her voice. His eyes never left her face. He was right, too. Most of the time. Wrong about a lot of things. But not about rain. She told him about the garden she used to keep tomatoes and bell peppers and snap peas that Harold would eat straight off the vine. About the students she'd taught. 35 years of children passing through her classroom. Some of them grandparents now themselves. About the way the house used to sound when it was full of people, David's basketball bouncing in the driveway. Jennifer's music floating down from her bedroom. Harold's laugh echoing off the kitchen walls. Max listened, or seemed to listen. His breathing would slow when she talked. His body settling into a stillness that wasn't quite relaxation, but wasn't fear either. The third week, he touched her. It happened on a Thursday evening. Sarah was sitting in Harold's old recliner. She'd finally made herself do it. Finally lowered herself into that cracked leather seat that still smelled faintly of Old Spice and sawdust. She had a book in her lap, something from the library she'd been meaning to read for months. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. A sound made her look down. Max was standing 3 feet away. He'd crossed the living room without her noticing the first time he'd left the kitchen on his own. Sarah stopped breathing. He took another step. Then another. His legs were steadier now, the weakness from the surgery fading as Tom's medications did their work. The bandage around his neck had come off 2 days ago, revealing a raw pink scar that circled his throat like a collar that would never come off. He stopped at her knee. Sarah didn't move, didn't reach for him. Her fingers gripped the arms of the recliner so hard her knuckles went white. Max lowered his head, slowly, carefully. He rested his muzzle on her thigh, the weight of it warm, solid, trusting, broke something open inside her. Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away, didn't make a sound, just sat there in the darkening room with this broken creature's head on her lap, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her leg. After a while, her hand unclenched from the armrest, she let it drift down, slowly, until her fingers rested on the top of his head. He flinched a tiny tremor that ran through his whole body, but he didn't pull away. She stroked the fur between his ears, matted still, but cleaner now than when she'd found him. Underneath it, she could feel the ridges of old scars, the bumps of wounds that had healed wrong. "Good boy," she whispered. "Good boy. Max." His tail moved, just once, a small wag, almost invisible, but Sarah saw it. By the end of the first month, the house felt different. Not full, it would never be full again. Not the way it had been when Harold was alive and the children came home for Sunday dinners. But not empty either. There was presence in it now. Weight, the sound of paws on hardwood floors, the soft huff of breath from the corner of whatever room she happened to be in. Max followed her everywhere. Kitchen, to living room, to bedroom, to porch, wherever Sarah went. He went, too. Not close enough to touch. Not yet. Not always. But close enough to see her. Close enough to know she hadn't left. She bought him a blue bandana at the Dollar General. Navy blue, soft cotton, $1.25. She tied it around his neck one morning, covering the worst of the scar tissue, and stepped back to look at him. He stood still while she adjusted it, those brown eyes fixed on her face. Waiting, as always, for the catch, for the trick, for whatever pain came next. "There," Sarah said. "Now you look like a proper gentleman." Max's tail wagged. Twice this time. The mornings took on a rhythm. Coffee at 6, she still made enough for 2 cups. Old habits dying hard. But now she poured the second one down the drain without thinking about it. Walk around the property at 7. Max padding along beside her, sniffing at the fence posts and the fallen leaves and all the new smells of a world he'd never been allowed to explore. Sit on the porch in the afternoon, watching the road. Max lying at her feet with his chin on his paws. She wasn't watching for anything anymore. That was the strange part. For 2 years. She'd sat on this porch waiting for the phone to ring, for a car to turn into the driveway, for someone to remember she existed. Now she sat there simply because the sun was warm and the air smelled like October, and there was a dog at her feet who wanted nothing from her except her presence. It was enough. Somehow, it was enough. The first Sunday of November, Pastor Thompson came by with a casserole. "Heard you've been keeping busy," he said, standing on her porch with the dish in his hands. His eyes drifted to Max, who had risen to his feet the moment the car pulled into the driveway. "That the dog folks are talking about is folks are talking a small town. Sarah." You know how it is. She did know. That was what worried her. Pastor Thompson handed her the casserole green bean, from the looks of it. The same recipe his wife had been making for church potluck since 1987. Betty at the grocery store mentioned it. Said you've got a German Shepherd now. Real pretty dog, she said. Max stood between Sarah and the pastor, not growling, not aggressive, just present. His eyes never left the stranger's face. "He's healing," Sarah said. "Had a rough time before." "So I heard." Thompson's voice was careful. "Also heard where he came from originally." Sarah's grip tightened on the casserole dish. "Earl Dawkins was in town yesterday," the pastor continued. "Stopped by the feed store. Jimmy Parsons was there. You know Jimmy? Works the register on weekends." Earl was asking questions about who's been picking up stray dogs around the county. The October wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. Max pressed closer to Sarah's leg. "He say anything about me specifically?" Pastor Thompson hesitated. Then he shook his head. Not that Jimmy heard, but Sarah. He glanced at Max again, at the blue bandana, at the scar tissue visible above the fabric. "You might want to be careful. Earl's not the kind of man who likes losing things he considers his." After the pastor left, Sarah stood on the porch for a long time, watching the empty road. Max sat beside her, his shoulder warm against her calf. Somewhere out there, Earl Dawkins was asking questions, and sooner or later, he was going to find answers. The black Dodge Ram pulled into her driveway on a Saturday afternoon. Sarah was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Max lay beside her chair, his head resting on his paws, watching a squirrel dart across the yard. 6 weeks since she'd found him in that ditch. 6 weeks of slow progress, small victories, the gradual rebuilding of something that had been systematically destroyed. The truck's engine growled as it rolled to a stop. Dust swirled around the tires. Max's head came up. His whole body changed in an instant. The relaxed sprawl vanished, replaced by a rigid tension that made every muscle stand out beneath his fur. His ears flattened against his skull. His tail curled tight between his hind legs. Sarah set down her coffee cup. Her hand trembled slightly, rattling the ceramic against the porch railing. The driver's door opened. Earl Dawkins stepped out. He was bigger than Sarah remembered, though she'd only seen him from a distance before. At the feed store, at the county fair. 50 years old. Shoulders like a linebacker. Belly straining against a flannel shirt that had seen better days. His face was red, the permanent flush of a man who spent his days in the sun and his nights with a bottle. He walked toward the porch with the unhurried stride of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. Max pressed himself flat against the floor. A high, thin whine escaped his throat, a sound Sarah had never heard him make before. His eyes were fixed on Earl, and in them she saw something that made her stomach clench. Recognition. "Mrs. Miller." Earl stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. His eyes moved from Sarah to Max and back again. "Heard you got yourself a new dog?" Sarah stood up. Her knees protested, her hip ached, but she made herself straighten to her full height. 5'4". She'd never felt shorter in her life. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Dawkins?" "I think you can." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See? That dog there that's my property. Got the chip to prove it. Been looking for him for a while now. Appreciate you taking care of him. But I'll be taking him home." Max was shaking. Tremors ran through his body in waves, so violent that Sarah could see them rippling through his fur. He'd flattened himself completely against the porch floor, his belly pressed to the wood, his chin on his paws, the posture of absolute submission, the posture of a creature that had learned what happened when it didn't submit. "I found this dog in a drainage ditch on Cutter's Lane," Sarah said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Half dead, starving, with a chain embedded so deep in his neck it had to be surgically removed." Earl's smile didn't waver. "Dogs get loose sometimes. Things happen." "Things happen." Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Is that what you call leaving an animal to die by the side of the road?" Something shifted in Earl's expression. The fake friendliness dropped away, replaced by something colder, harder. "Now listen here, Mrs. Miller. I don't know what stories you've been telling yourself, but that dog belongs to me. I've got paperwork, I've got the chip registration, and I've got the law on my side." He took a step up onto the first stair. "So why don't you make this easy on yourself and hand him over?" Max whimpered. The sound cut through Sarah like a knife. She looked down at him, this dog who had spent 6 weeks learning to trust her, learning that not every hand would strike him, not every voice would shout. 6 weeks of slow healing, of small wags, of a muzzle resting on her knee in the evening light, and now he was right back where he'd started, shaking, terrified, waiting for the pain, because of the man standing on her steps. No. The word came out before she could think about it. Earl's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me. I said no." Sarah stepped forward, putting herself between Earl and Max. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, her palms slick with sweat. "You dumped this dog like garbage. You chained him until the chain grew into his flesh. You starved him until his organs started failing. And now you want him back. What I did or didn't do is none of your business." Earl's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. "That's my dog, and you're going to give him to me. Or what?" Earl stepped up another stair. They were almost eye to eye now. Sarah could smell him sweat and tobacco and something sour underneath. She could see the broken capillaries in his cheeks, the yellowing of his eyes. "Or I call the sheriff," he said softly. "Tell him you stole my property. Make things real difficult for a woman living out here all alone." Sarah's throat tightened. He was right. The chip was in his name. The law might side with him. And she was 68 years old, alone on a piece of property that nobody visited, with no one to back her up. She thought about backing down, about handing Max over and going back to her quiet, empty life. It would be easier, safer. Then Max whimpered again, and Sarah remembered the way he'd licked her hand that first day. Dry tongue, cracked and rough. The gesture of a creature that had been shown nothing but cruelty, reaching out for kindness anyway. Something shifted inside her. Not courage exactly, something older. Stubbornness, maybe. The same thing that had made her teach for 35 years. Raise 2 children. Sit beside Harold's hospital bed for 6 months without complaining. The refusal to let a bully win. "You go right ahead and call Sheriff Davis," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. "And while you're at it, why don't you ask him about the animal control investigation last year? The one where they seized 3 of your dogs. I'm sure he'd love to hear how you've been treating this one." Earl's face darkened. A vein pulsed in his temple. "You don't know what you're messing with. Old woman." "Maybe not." Sarah met his eyes, held them. "But I know what I saw when I pulled that dog out of a ditch. And I know what a courtroom would think if they saw the photographs Dr. Whitfield took during surgery. The ones showing exactly what that chain did to him." Silence stretched between them. The November wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the oak trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Earl's hands flexed at his sides. For a moment, Sarah thought he might come at her, might shove past her and grab Max, and there wouldn't be a thing she could do to stop him. Then he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. The words came out low, barely above a whisper. "You think you're doing something noble here? You're just a lonely old woman who doesn't know her place. I'll be back with a lawyer, with paperwork. And when I am, you're going to regret making an enemy out of me." He turned and walked back to his truck. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as he reversed out of the driveway, the black Dodge disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Sarah stood on the porch, watching until the truck was gone. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to grip the railing to stay upright. Behind her, Max hadn't moved. He was still pressed flat against the floor, still trembling, still staring at the spot where Earl had stood. "It's okay," Sarah said, but her voice cracked on the words. "He's gone. He's gone. Max." The dog didn't respond. His eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold, where chains bit into flesh and kindness didn't exist. Sarah lowered herself to the porch floor beside him. Her hips screamed in protest. She didn't care. "Max, Max, look at me." Nothing. Just that glassy stare, that terrible trembling. She sat there in the fading afternoon light, not touching him, not speaking, just present, just waiting. Earl would be back. He'd promised, and next time, he might not leave empty-handed. What was she supposed to do then? The rumors started spreading the next day. Sarah found out at the county market on Monday morning. She was reaching for a can of Folgers when Betty Hutchins appeared at the end of the aisle, cart blocking the way, eyes bright with the particular gleam of someone who had news to share. "Sarah Miller, I heard about your little run-in with Earl Dawkins." Sarah's hand froze on the coffee can. "Word travels fast. Small town." Betty pushed her cart closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that carried across half the store. "Folks are saying you took his dog, that you've been keeping it out at your place for weeks now. Earl's telling everyone you threatened him." "I threatened him?" "That's what he's saying." Betty's eyes dropped to Sarah's cart bread. Milk. Dog food. The dog food sat there like an accusation. "You know, Sarah, people are worried about you. Living out there, all alone since Harold passed. Some folks think maybe you're not. Well," she tapped her temple. "You know." Sarah's face burned. She could feel other shoppers watching from the ends of aisles, pretending to examine cans of soup and boxes of cereal, while their ears strained for every word. "I found a dog that was dying," Sarah said. Her voice came out thin, defensive. "I took it to the vet. A dog that belongs to someone else." Betty shook her head, lips pressed together in that particular expression of pity that felt worse than outright scorn. "I'm just saying, honey, maybe you should think about what people are saying, about how this looks." Sarah abandoned her cart in the middle of the aisle, left the store without the coffee, without the milk, without any of it. Her hands shook so badly she could barely fit the key into the truck's ignition. Jennifer called that evening. The phone rang at 7:15 just as Sarah was sitting down with a bowl of soup she had no appetite to eat. Max lay in his corner. He hadn't left the kitchen since Earl's visit, hadn't come to her for comfort, hadn't done anything but lie there with his eyes fixed on some middle distance only he could see. "Mom, it's Jennifer." 4 months since her daughter had called. 4 months of silence, of Christmas cards without handwritten notes, of a voicemail message that never got returned. "Jennifer, how are you? Mom, what is going on?" Her daughter's voice was sharp, clipped. "Lisa Thornton called me today." Lisa Thornton. "Mom, from high school. She said you've been making a scene in town. Something about stealing someone's dog and yelling at him on your front porch." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "I didn't steal anything. I found a dog that was... I don't care about the dog." "Mom." Jennifer cut her off. "I care about my mother acting crazy in front of the whole town. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Lisa asked me if you were having problems." "Problems? Mom, if you were still thinking clearly..." The soup sat untouched on the table. Steam rose from the bowl, dissipating into nothing. "I'm fine. Jennifer, I'm thinking just fine." "Then what is this because normal people don't get into screaming matches with their neighbors over stray animals? Normal people don't..." Jennifer stopped, drew a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was the careful, measured tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Mom, David and I have been talking. We think it might be time to revisit the conversation about sunrise. Sarah's stomach dropped. The assisted living place? It's a community. Mom, people your age, activities, someone to check on you. Jennifer paused. Someone to make sure you're not making decisions that don't make sense. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it. The words wouldn't come. Think about it, Jennifer said. That's all we're asking. Just think about it. The line went dead. Sarah set the phone back in its cradle. Her hand was steady now, too steady. The steadiness of something that had gone numb. David called 2 hours later. Mom, I talked to Jennifer. His voice was softer than his sister's, but underneath the softness was the same message. She's worried. We both are. This thing with the dog. It's not like you. You don't know what I'm like anymore. David, you haven't visited in 2 years. Silence on the line. Then, that's not fair. Isn't it? More silence. Sarah could hear him breathing, could picture him in his office in Atlanta, surrounded by the life he'd built that had no room for her in it. Look, David said finally. I know things have been hard since Dad died, but this, picking fights with people, spending money you don't have on a stray dog. Mom, it sounds like you're not coping. It sounds like you need help. I don't need help. I need... Sarah stopped. What did she need? Someone to talk to. Someone to care. She had a dog for that now, a broken, traumatized dog that couldn't even look at her anymore. Just think about sunrise, David said. That's all? For us? Please. After he hung up, Sarah sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Max hadn't moved. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, his body pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. She'd done this to him. She'd given him 6 weeks of hope, 6 weeks of healing. And then Earl Dawkins had walked up her porch steps and torn it all away. And now her own children thought she was crazy. The town thought she was crazy. A lonely old woman who didn't know her place. Maybe they were right. Sarah looked at her reflection in the dark window. An old woman stared back at her. Gray hair that she hadn't bothered to set in weeks. Lines carved deep around her mouth and eyes. When had she become this person? This strange, isolated creature that people whispered about in grocery stores? She thought about what would happen when Earl came back. With lawyers, with paperwork, with the law on his side. She thought about Max, returned to a chain in someone's yard, starving, forgotten, waiting for death. Because of her. Because she'd thought she could save him. Because she'd been too proud, too stubborn, too desperate for something to care about. Maybe the kindest thing she could do now was let him go. Take him to a shelter in another county, somewhere Earl would never find him. Give him a chance at a real family, someone younger, stronger, with money and connections and the ability to protect him. Someone who wasn't a crazy old woman who'd already failed at everything else. Sarah pressed her palms against her eyes, her shoulders shook, but no sound came out. In the corner, Max lay motionless, watching her with those empty eyes. She had wanted to save him. Instead, she had made everything worse. What kind of person did that make her? A sound broke through the darkness. Soft, barely audible, the click of claws on linoleum. Sarah lifted her head from her hands. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks wet. The kitchen was pitch black. She hadn't moved to turn on a light. Hadn't moved at all since she'd hung up on David. Another click. Closer now. She turned toward the sound. Max was standing in the middle of the kitchen floor. He'd left his corner. For the first time in 3 days. He'd left that spot against the wall where he'd been frozen since Earl's voice had sent him spiraling back into whatever memories haunted him. His legs were shaking. His whole body trembled visibly, even in the dim light filtering through the window. His ears were flat, his tail tucked, every line of his posture screaming fear. But he was moving toward her, one step, then another. His claws clicked against the floor, a hesitant rhythm, stopping and starting, as if each step required a separate decision. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. Max stopped 2 feet away from her, close enough that she could see the whites of his eyes, the rapid flutter of his nostrils. He was terrified. Whatever courage had pushed him out of that corner was fighting against every instinct telling him to retreat. He didn't retreat. Instead, slowly, so slowly she could count each vertebra as it lowered, he lay down beside her. Not across the room, not at a safe distance, right next to her, his back pressed against her hip, the warmth of his body seeping through the thin fabric of her house dress. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the thing traumatized dogs didn't do. Tom had told her that. Back at the clinic, dogs that had been abused learned to protect themselves. They kept space between their bodies and potential threats. They never made themselves vulnerable on purpose. Max had just pressed his spine against her. The most vulnerable part of him offered freely because she was crying, because she was alone in the dark, because even after everything, the fear, the flashbacks, the terror that Earl's visit had reawakened, he couldn't leave her to face this by herself. Sarah's hand moved before she could think about it. Her fingers found the fur between his ears, rough, scarred, but warming now under her touch. Max flinched. A small tremor ran through him, but he didn't pull away. "You came back," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "You came back for me." Max's tail moved. Just a twitch, but it was there. And something shifted inside Sarah. Something that had been crumbling for days found its footing again. She thought about what she'd been planning. Taking Max to a shelter. Surrendering him. Walking away. She thought about Earl, and lawyers, and the town's whispers, and her children's disappointment. And then she thought about this dog. This broken, terrified creature who had every reason to hide in his corner until the world forgot he existed. Who had chosen, instead, to cross a dark kitchen floor and press his shaking body against a woman who was falling apart. If he could do that after everything. What excuse did she have? Harold's voice came back to her. Not, "You're the strongest person I know," that felt like a lie right now. Something else. Something he'd said once when she was complaining about a difficult parent at school. "You know what you did, Sarah. You know why you did it. That's all that matters in the end." She knew why she'd stopped on Cutter's Lane. She knew why she'd knelt in the dirt with her bad knee screaming. She knew why she'd written a check that emptied her savings account. Because it was right. Because a creature was suffering. And she could help. The town could talk. Her children could disapprove. Earl Dawkins could threaten whatever he wanted. It didn't change what she knew. Sarah pushed herself up from the floor. Her hip protested. Her knees cracked. She ignored them both. She walked to the light switch and flipped it on. The kitchen flooded with harsh yellow light. Max blinked, squinting, but he didn't retreat to his corner. He stayed where he was, watching her. "You know something, Max?" Sarah's voice was steadier now. "You've got more courage than I do, coming out here when you're scared half to death." She looked down at him, this dog with his scars and his trembling and his stubborn, impossible trust. "Guess I'd better try to keep up." She picked up the phone. The sheriff's office number was written on a pad by the refrigerator. She'd copied it down months ago, when there'd been a string of break-ins on the rural routes. Her finger dialed before she could second-guess herself. 3 rings. 4. Millbrook Sheriff's Office, Shaw, this Deputy Collins speaking. I need to speak with Sheriff Davis, Sarah said. My name is Sarah Miller. I have some questions about animal cruelty laws in the state of Georgia and about a man named Earl Dawkins. The meeting happened 4 days later. Sheriff Bobby Davis sat across from Sarah at her kitchen table, a manila folder open in front of him. He was a big man with a soft voice and hands that looked like they'd spent years doing hard work before he'd pinned on a badge. Dr. Whitfield sent over his records, the sheriff said. Photos from the surgery, documentation of the dog's condition when you brought him in. He tapped the folder. This is bad, Mrs. Miller. Real bad. Bad enough to matter. Sheriff Davis looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. Under Georgia law, abandoning an animal in a condition likely to cause suffering is a misdemeanor. But this, he gestured at the folder, the embedded chain, the advanced heartworm, the evidence of long-term starvation, this goes beyond abandonment. This constitutes aggravated cruelty. That's a felony. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. What about the microchip Earl says the dog belongs to him? Ownership doesn't give anyone the right to torture an animal. The sheriff closed the folder. I've dealt with Earl Dawkins before. The investigation last year, we couldn't make charges stick then, but we came close. If Earl wants to push this, he's going to find himself answering some uncomfortable questions. And if this goes to court, everything in this folder becomes public record. So he can't just take Max back, not without going through legal channels. And Mrs. Miller, Sheriff Davis stood up, tucking the folder under his arm. If I were Earl Dawkins, and I knew what was in this file, I'd think real hard about whether one dog was worth the trouble. He paused at the door. You did good. A lot of people would have kept driving that day. After he left, Sarah sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Max had emerged from the corner while the sheriff was there, not approaching, but present, watching. His ears had been up the whole time. She looked at him now. This dog who had taught her something about courage she'd forgotten she knew. Well, she said quietly, I guess we're in this together now. Max's tail wagged. Twice, but even as relief settled into her bones. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Earl Dawkins was not the kind of man who gave up easily. Wounded pride made men do desperate things. And she hadn't heard the last of him yet. 6 months later, the farmhouse fit differently. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching March sunlight pour through the oak trees. Coffee steam rose from the cup in her hands. 1 cup now, not 2, and she'd stopped noticing the difference months ago. Behind her, claws clicked against the hardwood floor. Max appeared at her side. His coat had grown back thick and glossy, the patches of missing fur replaced by healthy growth that shone in the morning light. The scar around his neck would never disappear, a permanent ring of pale tissue where the chain had lived, but the blue bandana covered most of it. He wore it every day now. Morning, old boy. His tail wagged, a real wag, not the tentative twitch of those early weeks. He pressed his nose against her hip, then padded to the back door and looked at her expectantly. Their morning walk had become ritual, around the property line, past the old barn, down to the creek and back. Max ran ahead now, actually ran, legs stretching, ears flying, then circled back to check on her before taking off again. Earl Dawkins had never come back. Sheriff Davis had stopped by last month with news Earl was selling the ranch, moving somewhere out of state. Seems the county had reopened the investigation from the previous year, and this time they had Dr. Whitfield's photographs to add to the file. Earl had decided one dog wasn't worth the trouble after all. Tom had updated Max's microchip registration 3 months ago. The paperwork was official now. Max belonged to Sarah Miller of Millbrook, Georgia. She'd started tutoring again. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. 3 children from the elementary school who needed help with reading. The first session, Max had watched the children with wary eyes from his corner. By the 3rd week, he was letting them scratch behind his ears. The phone still didn't ring much. Jennifer sent a text on Sarah's birthday brief. Impersonal. David called at Christmas, kept the conversation short, but Sarah had stopped counting the silences between contacts. She had other things to fill her days now. This afternoon, she sat on the porch in the warm spring light, a book open in her lap. Max lay beside her chair, his body relaxed, his breathing slow and even. A car passed on the road. Max's head came up, ears swiveling. Then he looked at Sarah, and his head lowered again. He trusted her. After everything, he trusted her. Max shifted, resting his muzzle on her thigh. The weight of it settled into her bones, warm, solid, familiar. A soft sound escaped his throat. Not a whimper, not pain, something quieter, something like release. His eyes drifted closed, his body relaxed completely against her leg. Sarah's hand found his head. Her fingers traced the edge of his bandana, felt the ridge of scar tissue beneath. "Rest easy, old boy," she murmured. "You're home now." The oak trees swayed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang 5 o'clock. And in the house that was no longer too empty, 2 souls who had found each other on a dirt road sat together in the fading light. Finally, at peace. If something in this story stayed with you, a weight in your chest, a memory surfacing, that's all right. You don't need to name it or explain it. Some things just settle quietly in us, the way dust settles after a long journey. Many of us have known what it feels like to be passed by, to sit in a room that used to hold more voices, to wonder if anyone would notice if we simply stopped showing up. Some of us have carried that quietly for years, never speaking it aloud, because who would we tell? And perhaps you've also known what it means to be seen by something unexpected, a creature, a stranger, a moment that arrived without warning and reminded you that you still matter to this world. Whatever this story stirred in you, it doesn't need to be resolved tonight. It's okay to let it rest beside you. Unfinished, the way so many true things remain. Not every ache requires an answer. Not every tenderness needs a name. You stayed until the end, and that means something. Thank you for being here.